Is there a link between the kinds of psychedelic experiences that I talk about on this channel and other altered states like those described by religious mystics or near-death experiences? To explore this topic, I'm speaking with Curtis Childs from the Swedenborg Foundation, which is an organisation who studies and follows the teachings of an 18th century mystic called Emanuel Swedenborg, who had many experiences which will sound very familiar to those of us who use psychedelics, where he talks about leaving his body, visiting divine realms, and communicating with external entities such as aliens and the creator of the universe. So yeah, there is a lot here I could relate to. Curtis is a scholar of Swedenborg and hosts a YouTube channel called Off the Left Eye, where he unpacks these ideas and reframes them for a modern audience, and I'll leave a link to that in the description below. Now, a quick explanation. I was recovering from a throat infection at the time we recorded this, so my voice sounds a little bit strange, so apologies for that. Hopefully you can put up with it, because this is a fascinating conversation. And even though we're coming at these experiences from very different perspectives, the amount of common ground here really is quite remarkable. So, without any further ado, I bring you Curtis Childs from the Swedenborg Foundation.
So I am here with Curtis Childs from the Swedenborg Foundation. I believe is that the right
That's
right
it.
home?
You got it. Yep.
Yeah, and this kind of conversation has come around basically somebody who'd, as part of your foundation, had seen a few of my videos, heard me talking around some of these sort of quite bombastic concepts, and figured it would be interesting for you and I to have a conversation, because I think bombastic concepts is quite woven into the nature of your belief system. And right. I think there's also, I say belief system because I suppose you are coming at it from more a religious angle, whereas I guess coming from more of a kind of an experiential angle. But let's introduce yourself, Curtis. How would you describe yourself and what you do?
Man, so my name is Curtis Childs, and I'm vice president of programming at the Swedenborg Foundation. And that was great. Yeah, you pronounced his name right. You get all kinds of pronunciation on that. But Swedenborg was essentially 1700s top scientist in Europe, one of the top ones, inventor, politician, part of the mining industry in Sweden, which was a very powerful industry. So he was doing a lot of things really well. But then he started to tell everyone that he was like talking to spirits and traveling out of his body, and that changed his whole trajectory of his life. All the people that he used to hang out with thought he was weird, didn't want to talk to him in the same way, and so you end up with him having a very different legacy than he could have. But since the time that he started writing about these experiences he was having, there's been a lot of interest in the concepts and what they might reveal about the nature of life, and so the Swedenborg Foundation has been keeping his works published and translated. He wrote in Latin originally for about 170 years now. So I'm just sort of the latest in that line of taking these ideas and diving in to see what his really organized description of some kind of inner world can tell us about what we go through day to day.
Okay, and just to put a kind of a nutshell, and I totally appreciate, I'm trying to condense it. I'm just trying to bring out the audience up to speed on where we're at. But Swedenborg viewed this experience so very sort of transcendent experiences, very reminiscent of what people who have psychedelic or shamanistic experiences would describe. But he encapsulated all this through a religious lens, and that's the work that you're sort of carrying on today. Is through this, like I don't know, is that a reasonable thing to say, through a religious lens to it?
Yes, very. Like if you just open, well, it depends on if you open one of his published books. He's also got like his journals that have been since published, but he didn't intend to put through publication. If you just crack one of those things open, you will see a lot of Christian terminology. Like people will sometimes call him a Christian mystic, and he'll talk in there about God and heaven and hell and the Trinity and the Bible. So a lot of Christian language. Definitely you would categorize him as a religious philosopher. He's a little harder to put in that mold than, let's say, like Martin Luther or somebody that's just doing theology, because he's also doing phenomenology. Like he's describing, like this is not, I'm thinking about God, but this is, tonight, this is what happened to me. There was two spirits that appeared in front of my bed, and they said this thing, and that meant this. And while he definitely is got a ton of Christianity in what he's doing, there's also been like, there was a guy named D.T. Suzuki who was famous for bringing Zen Buddhism kind of westward, and he wrote this book about Swedenborg that was called Buddha of the North, because he felt like the actual world Swedenborg was describing mirrors very closely a lot of the core tenets of Zen Buddhism. He was, and the stuff that he was saying about the way that the Christian world works, even like the nature of what the biblical text is and why it's valuable, it in some ways lines up with Christianity, but it's also different enough that his works were put on trial in the theocratic state of Sweden there, because they were saying these things that were far outside the bubble of Christian dogma. And you see points of interaction between like people who have near-death experiences, people who have the kind of experiences you were just talking about, and the stuff he describes. So he's got a lot of Christianity in him for sure, but he's kind of hard to categorize in some of those ways. And I think that's part of why he's remained so obscure, even though he's influenced a lot of prominent artists and thinkers and human rights activists and things. He's just like, it's just hard for somebody to swallow the whole thing. You know, like, okay, I like the experiences, but the Christian part, or I like the Christian part, but the experiences, and add on top of that he's writing in Latin, which was like the language of the educated back then. And it's can be pretty dense and pretty technical. It's just like, that's part of why I'm trying to get people to understand the basics of it so they can see if it's something they feel like is valuable. But certainly you could pop open any book and you could see some very religious looking stuff in there.
And where do you personally sit on that spectrum? I mean, if we can sort of cut to like the bread and butter question, like, what do you think is going on here? Like, do you interpret as this a person having a psychological experience, or is this like sort of a divine gift bestowed upon him? Like, what? Yeah,
right. I generally, and I can only know to a certain extent. I haven't had these sorts of experiences like he's talking about. So I just have to armchair it. I have to read it and then see if I can, because he'll talk about the really bizarre stuff, out on the fringes. Like, this is how, the weird stuff of spirituality works. But he gives you some of the tools to go back and look for kind of the echoes of it and the way that your own mind works. So I'll try to follow that trail and see. It seems to me like he's onto something. Like I think at this point that the world that he's talking about, the unseen spiritual world, is this objective reality that's out there. It seems to me like, from both that his ideas have been helpful to me, and like when I've needed something to organize my life in, or something to trust, or something, they seem to provide something when other stuff has not been as reliable. But then also the corroboration of near-death experiences or all kinds of other experiences. So I would say that I'm into it. Like I think, oh, this is cool. Like this has helped me. And it's like if everyone was thirsty and you found water, you'd be like, well, I got to tell people that it's there. So I feel like I'm giving this to you. I'm not just curious, like this is a fascinating intellectual thing. Like, to me, I think this is really of value. So I want to make it accessible to you. So he doesn't ever say like what he was going through is a divine state that is somehow like the laws of regular life have been suspended just for him. Like, this is something that like the way consciousness was supposed to be is you're aware of this dual reality, but people have gotten basically superficial enough that usually that's not open. So he had a very different life than you or I have day to day, just organically, but he's not saying I'm somebody that's doing something that's impossible for you to do.
I think when I've only had a very brief introduction to stuff, because in preparation for this conversation, I was watching a lot of the videos on your channel, and and some of your associates, I assume. And yeah, I think that there's a lot there that I recognize, and I think you referred to him as a mystic earlier on, and I think that's, I think, a very appropriate label. Because yes, I mean, kind of a lot of the terminology for the experiences that I go through within these kind of traditional shamanic sort of experience, or even just, the common psychedelics are often referred to as a mystical experience, because they do have this character of the sacred, the divine, like you are. And I can very much relate to a lot of what you've just said, in that it feels incredibly organized when you are there. There is something about these states which is not like random chaos. So I think this is kind of where a lot of like the visualizations break down. When you see something on TV where someone's on drugs, then you tend to see sort of things just melting and it's sloppy and things get fuzzy. But when you are actually in one of these states, and I'm not just talking about a sort of a recreational being high at a party, but I'm talking about like when you are having no experience of being in your body, when you are completely detached from this reality. There is a one-to-one reality replacement taking place, almost like this fancy VR technology we've had now. Then it is incredibly structured. It is. I mean, people often refer to it as being like a programming code, or like the sort of like the modular nature of the universe is kind of presented to you. And so I think it's very easy to get behind those kind of concepts, what Swedenborg talks around, and as in that this is just as much reality as this reality. And in fact, a phrase that's often used in psychedelic circles is it's more real than real, because it feels like that. It's startling how real and vivid this experience is. It's like it doesn't feel like mushy brain farts going on. Something is very organized here. No, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say that I think that the same sort of thing that you're talking about, where you have on TV, the kind of journeys that you're going on are depicted as this weird mushy nothing, but that's not really the way they are. I think that that's a lot of the time with spiritual things, like the experiences, it'll sort of seem like it's just the spiritual side of life is something that has no structure to it and no order and no laws that govern it. But I think that's what's part of what's remarkable about the world Swedenborg describes, is that it, just like the physical world, obviously is organized by principles, and it, what E equals MC squared is here and there. I don't know if that's still a valid equation or what, but it's like there's a certain way things work. And I think it can drive people crazy when religious people start talking about this other part of life that doesn't seem to operate by any rational law. So it is like definitely an important part of it. Important part of what I enjoy about going through what he's talking about is that you see an explanation that has this order to it and this self-consistency in it. And the more real than real, it would have to be. Because why would, if it's part of the same, meta reality, why would it be less real?
Yeah. Can I just ask, how would you slice up the pie of, say, like, is spirit and spirituality, is that the same thing to you? So I've seen like a lot of your videos where you're talking around like spirits in the room. There are spirits here around me. So this is, is that how you would define spirituality, the presence of these things? Or is, because I just to sort of preamble, like the way I kind of interpret spirituality is a state of being. So it would kind of almost be like, I have this, my waking state, I have my psychological state, I have my emotional state. These are all kind of like magisteria that are like overlapping through me. I'm the kind of the nexus point for these things. And, I could tell you I'm happy or that I'm in love, and you would understand what I'm on about, but I can't display it. And sort of spirituality, I think, is something like that. It's something I feel, it means something to me. I can tell when I'm aligned with it. I can tell when I'm being a knob. I can tell when I'm not aligned with it. Yeah. And so, I'm just kind of wondering, like, what would you define spirituality as? Is it just the presence of, you know, what some people might call that the paranormal, or?
Yeah, right. It's a great question. And I do think you can make a pretty clean distinction between the paranormal and then being spiritual, as a lot of people will talk about it. Usually you use that word now to describe some kind of like moral aspiration that you have. Like I want to try and approach this in a spiritual way, meaning, or
like
a
higher power. I think whatever that higher power is, whether it's yourself or God, right, or whatever your chosen thing is. But I think that's why I kind of refer to it as an alignment. You when you feel aligned with that higher power, you feel kind of spiritual, and when you don't, you don't.
Yes, right. So I think that Swedenborg will sort of use those terms interchangeably, but I think the Latin that he was writing in is a really succinct language. So you have to, there's like a lot fewer words than English. I do think so he'll talk about this spiritual dimension of reality. So there's physical and spiritual, and to him, consciousness is spiritual. So the part of you that's conscious is the spiritual part of you, and the whole spiritual world is consciousness based. So like in the physical world, it is matter and energy based. So for example, gravity is like that law is something that interacts with matter, and it's the reason why there's a earth here and why I stay on it instead of ghosts. It's the reason why I am where I am and why I can't. It's physically based. Spiritually, it would be emotional and mental things. Laws are what run it. So for example, for him, love would be like what you are into. So what you care about, what you aspire toward, that sort of plays the role of gravity. So people who love similar things move toward each other like bodies with mass would move toward each other in the physical world. So you have the spiritual dimension of life. But then there certainly is this whole other side of it, which is, what is it to live a spiritual life? What is it to be a spiritual person? And that's actually, even though he has all this description of his spiritual experiences, which to him would mean he believes you've got a spirit and a body. So you have the physical and the spiritual part of you, and spiritual experiences are just when you become aware of the spiritual side of your consciousness rather than the physical side, which is part of why, like if you're meditating or something, you really get your physical senses to become quiescent, then you start to pop into spiritual things. It would be about the spiritual journey is about how you live and what you love, rather than just being aware that there's a spiritual world around you. Because even though he's talking so much about all these spiritual things, the core of what he's writing about is, the good life. Like how do you behave well and ethically and spiritually? Because to him, that is what the whole spiritual world revolves around, because it's a world that's based on what you care about and what you believe or think or understand.
Yeah. I think there's something said there around kind of relating that kind of spirituality with consciousness, and I think a lot of the terminology that pops up in sort of modern culture is of awakening, sort of people who've awakened to these experiences, because a lot of the time in sort of our modern lives, we're just so subdued by sort of the repetition of life or whatever, or sort of bunked over the head with social media or TV or whatever your sort of chosen brain opiate is. Then when you have one of these kind of experiences, then it does feel like, oh well, now I'm conscious. Now this is the kind of the first thing, the first kind of awakening there. So I think there is some kind of association there between this kind of when you become sort of very like fully conscious, do you know what? I hate all this kind of pretentious language of like sort of sort of like awakening, and I'm like higher being, I'm a higher awakened being and stuff like that. But I can't. But they are good kind of terms for how it feels to go through that. Can I just ask? Is this something you've experienced yourself? Did you go through one of these? Not throw my mic around. Have you been through one of these kind of like awakening experiences yourself, or what brought you to where you are today?
Sure. I have not. I haven't ever had an overt experience where like you would say, well, that was something science doesn't explain, or something non-physical or something like that. I haven't. But I've been very immersed in reading about other people's accounts. So Swedenborg extensively, but also accounts of things like near-death experiences, or the whole spectrum of paranormal or spiritual experiences that people have. And this is, especially since I got on the internet and started talking about these sorts of things, I really come to appreciate just how many different kinds of experiences there are and how many people are having them so much. So, but I've had a lot of times when the ideas in people's spiritual experiences have had a huge impact on me. I've had stuff that I feel like is right up close to that line, where my interaction with my own thoughts and feelings is getting really intense, and it feels like it's a mirror of what is described in these more overt spiritual experiences. But I'm just like a muggle. You read Harry Potter? Like I'm just like
I'm English, mate. Wait, it's mandatory to read Harry Potter.
But I think I haven't ever quite gone across that. I've had some dreams that felt like pretty significant and stuff, but generally I'm learning through reading. And actually I kind of like that, because while a lot of people have had experiences, a lot of people haven't. And I think that equips me to help try to communicate it maybe to people who haven't, that I'm trying to reach in there, understand it, but see it where I do see it, where it becomes real for me is in my regular day-to-day life. So one of the things that Swedenborg asserts is that there's this spiritual world and there are entities in it and there's all this intense stuff going on. But even if you're not aware of it directly, it affects your thoughts and your feelings, because just like right now, the physical environment that I'm in, like the lights that are around me and stuff, affects my mood. The place where I am somewhere spiritually, because I have a spirit and it's got to have a location. And so I'm surrounded by a certain sort of climate or a certain community, and that affects how I think and feel. So it's been in studying the depths of Swedenborg's experiences and everything he says about how that world works, and then looking into my mind, particularly around, like, I've had a lot of struggles with anxiety and depression like that. And when I was 18 or 17 or 18, I really started to have my first episode of that. And I was like obsessive compulsive. And I was really feeling like, wow, I have no control over my mind. And my mind is this weird, hostile place. And it was in looking at Swedenborg's description of the spiritual world and mapping that onto what I was going through, and then using some of his knowledge to develop techniques to kind of control or survive my inner world. That's where it really becomes real to me, or to take those principles and use them in like a regular sort of everyday way, but yet the difference it does make in those parts of my life, that's, to me, feels like, oh wow, that's really handy, that there must be something to it. So that's sort of where my real hook to it comes from.
Yeah, I think for myself, it's the way I interpret a lot of these kind of experiences is that it's pure meaning. It's like pure narrative. It's the kind of, I mean, we are kind of like storytelling creatures. We tell ourselves stories about how we interact with everything around us. And you get to one of these states where it is, I mean, it's not over milk cliche. It is pure meaning. That's all it is. It's completely non-material. But on somehow it means everything. You pop the cork on the champagne bottle of your emotions and your experiences. It just lays out before you, and you assemble it, or it assembles itself into some sort of narrative structure, which can explain your place within the universe. It's incredibly profound, and a lot of people refer to these kind of experiences as being the most profound experiences of their life. And not just within terms of psychedelic experiences, but also, as you mentioned, with like near-death experiences, which again sound incredibly similar to psychedelic experiences. I have somebody on my Discord server, so I'll just give a shout out to Mombot, who has had both kind of experiences, and describes a near-death experience as being just almost identical to sort of like a DMT trip or something like that.
Yeah, isn't that where you get a lot of DMT in your body, is when you're dying naturally, right? So, well,
allegedly, I mean that's kind of, I don't think that's ever been proven. It's certainly.
Oh, they don't know that. Yeah.
No, it was a hypothesis put forward by a guy who was doing DMT research, but it wasn't. It was just a theory he put forward. He didn't sort of. I think where it was going with it was that because DMT is again perhaps an endogenous chemical. It's kind of produced within our bodies. Again, perhaps I don't know if that's been proven or not.
Okay.
But that it could be the sort of the mechanism that links with sort of dreams. Why dreams can be very vivid, and that also it could be used as something to smooth over the transition as you go into the next stage. So so I near-death experience, you go and then come back a bit.
Right. And once sort of like the world of different experiences merging. I mean, for Swedenborg, it started with dreams for him, that he actually kept he didn't used to have any of these spiritual experiences. He ended up, during the period when he was writing the books that I talk about on my channel, he was having them constantly every day for like 30 years, according to what he was reporting, which is remarkable in itself, but also gave him enough time to really get his feet under him and get really particular about his recording everything. But for most of his life, up until his like mid-50s, he wasn't having those at all. And when it all started, he was keeping a travel journal, but during it, he started to record his dreams because his dreams had become more vivid. And this was like, it was before it was a thing really to do that. I mean, there definitely wasn't a field of like psychoanalysis for your dreams or meaning in your dreams, but he was writing them down and starting to write down like what he thought the recurring characters and symbols would mean in them. And they started to take on more and more what he felt like was his personal meaning. And it was during that time that he began to then have these experiences in like the hypnagogic state, but then all the way into when he was awake. He said in a state of full wakefulness, he kept saying. So there was like these two sort of like when two rivers converge. He had the dream world and the spiritual experience world sort of converged in him there. So I am fascinated by that, and that's cool to think of somebody who's had experiences with psychedelics and then with near-death experiences, and being able to compare those two things together. That's pretty fascinating. Yeah,
because I must admit I was quite skeptical around sort of near-death experiences, and it was only through the description of this person that and how vividly she described it and how I could sort of relate to it then from the psychedelics side. I thought, okay, there's something here, and it tied into another very common theme when I first started sort of accessing these states, where it feels incredibly familiar. Like when you get there, you feel stupid at not realizing it was going to be this. It's like, of course it's going to be this transforming tesseract of pure knowledge and the library of every event in the universe. Of course it's going to be this, and you'd feel this very strong sense of coming home. So again, which is then also a very common theme in near-death experiences. But I've got to ask, I don't want to sort of put you on the spot or sort of too much like tempting you to the dark side. But given that these kind of your interest in the writings of Swedenborg, and that these kind of experiences kind of are available, have you never been tempted to take a step into the sort of the worlds that I describe? And I appreciate there's a sort of legality thing there, but certainly these things now are becoming sort of legal in various places. So it kind of, the experiences on offer to you, and I just wondering would you want those kind of experiences?
Yeah.
And if so, what stopped you so far?
Yeah, like why wouldn't I just jump in and do that? Let's see. So I haven't done it. And like I remember when I was younger, like I knew I had friends that were doing it, and I never quite wanted to. I was a little like, oh, well, there's a certain line that I don't cross. Like, okay, maybe I'll smoke pot, but I won't do that. Right. But then since then, I think like there's probably two reasons. One is that I've got this project I'm working on in my current mind, which is that I've got this particularly Swedenborg's material, and I'm using it painstakingly over all these years to develop this certain kind of way that I approach life and certain kind of state of day-to-day operation that I get into. And I just don't want to mess with it. Like, sure. I don't know, like it could be really great. People have talked to me and said, oh, this has really helped me, or it could, be counterproductive to the particular
it definitely can. I mean, like the analogy I used earlier, it is, you pop the cork on these things and it just comes splurging out. No,
yeah.
If you can be in a place in your life where that's actually useful, if you're bottled up, but then if you're in a place in your life where I can totally respect what you're saying, where if you found that equilibrium, don't roll the dice again. This is a good place to be.
Well, exactly. And then the other side of it is I get nervous stemming back to my anxiety and depression. So because like I used to be like younger, a little more into partying, and that was great. But as my depression ramped up, stuff that I used, like if I was gonna stuff that I used to do, I would more often have bad experiences with it.
Yeah.
And it would feed like right into my anxiety and depression. So I really got like, okay, no, I'm stepping back from all that. I can't handle that state, because even just my normal state was fraught with all kinds of negative stuff. So part of me is still like, I don't know what I'm going to find. I don't know what I'm going to find if I get in there. Like it might be just too much of a bad trip. So that's sort of where I've got my little world, and I'm good there. So I think this is
I can respect that, mate. I think it comes back to the spirituality thing we talked about earlier. I don't think it kind of particularly matters how you get there. I think what matters is that you get there, and whether you do that through psychedelic drugs, or whether you're doing it through sort of meditation, or sort of martial arts, or whatever it is, studying, or whatever it is that sort of gets you that sense of alignment, and that gets you to that sort of spiritual place. I think they're all equally valid. I certainly don't buy into this thing that we should put drugs in the water supply and everyone should trip out. I think that's absolutely nonsense.
Well, you said in an email that you sent to me earlier describing your channel, and you're like, I explore, I forget exactly how you phrase it, explore psychedelics to see how they can improve our lives. Right. And so I'm exploring Swedenborg to see how it can improve our lives. So really, like at the core, we have the same intent. Like the intent is, how do you make life better for people? And I think
I guess if we can just stack on that, I think what you're actually doing is, and probably certainly what I'm probably doing as well, we're exploring ourselves to make our lives better, and we're kind of outsourcing to a kind of like, almost like a third party, in order to sort of like steer that narrative. So I'm getting it from one set of experiences, you're getting it from a different set of experiences, and then I think part of this, and I think this is where a lot of the positive benefits can come from these kind of things, is that it's how you relate these things back to yourself. And we kind of refer to this as like integration. It's like how you can sort of take this. And I think this is one of your videos I watched, Curtis, which I really liked, where it was, you talked about checking yourself to stop becoming sort of like too entrenched as like kind of in like a religious fanatic kind of way.
Yes. And
certainly this happens within my community, of people will just, again, come out with sort of these absurd statements like, oh, everybody needs to do this high dose of this because it's like, no, that was you, mate. It's not everybody needs to do this. Just chill,
Yeah.
So yeah,
it's like saying, I took vitamin D and it really helped me. Everyone's got to take vitamin D. Well, you don't know if they have a deficiency or not, like you did. So yeah.
Everyone's trying to be the doctor. But what can I just ask in relation to Swedenborg stuff? What do you think was going on with him, and what do you think he was going through? Because I mean, he doesn't make any particular reference, as far as I'm aware, to taking anything which would bring out these sort of states.
Yes.
But what's your take there?
I think you're right that he doesn't. I've never come across anything where there's any reference to him taking substances, and even he keeps like journals every day. He'd be in there somewhere, I feel like. So I think that everything has order and structure in it. So these experiences that you're talking about, the spiritual experiences people have, it's caused by something about how the brain gets structured, right? How things affect the way substances are in the brain. Swedenborg got somehow into a condition where his mind and spirit were in an order or in a structure in which these experiences could come effortlessly to him. And I don't know, and I think what he was doing, it just was an awareness of a surrounding reality that people tap into. I think like the near-death experience thing, for example, in the book that Raymond Moody coined that term, Dr. Raymond Moody, the near-death experience. In that book, he goes and looks at, well, with all these people talking about, I saw the tunnel of light, I saw these beings, there was no time and space, I could see all the moments of my life flash in front of me. And he's like, well, if so many people around all these different hospitals and stuff are reporting this, it's got to be that back in history, somebody's reporting it, unless this whole thing came into being in the last 20 years. So he refers to a few things like the Tibetan Book of the Dead, the Bible, I forget what else, but Swedenborg is one of those, because there's such a strong parallel in this stuff that Swedenborg was recording in those people. So I think that Swedenborg got into a state, which I think is actually a state that is natural to human beings, but we don't see for a number of reasons. And I think he was observing a reality that affects all of us all the time, and that plenty of people get glimpses into, but he just got this like backstage pass. Like he was in a state where not only did he have good access to it, but he just had the right mind to really be able to understand it and catalog it, because he was already so honed from doing the same thing he was a leading anatomist, right? He was an inventor, and he was working in government. He knew the basis of how so many things worked, and he knew how to write a scientific paper. He knew how to do observation. Science wasn't nearly as sophisticated back then as it is now, but he knew how to write really clearly and how to categorize ideas and use the geometric style to make sure. So I think that he had the dual whammy of a lot of access and the right mind. And he was very smart. I mean, people try to estimate his IQ as one of the highest of all times, just based on what he was able to accomplish. So he was able to, I think, not just like, you can get a much more vivid and emotionally stirring description from a modern near-death experience or somebody describing some kind of spiritual experience than you get from Swedenborg, but I've never yet found something that's as organized and comprehensive as what he describes, where he's not just saying like, here's what you experienced when you went and visited a country. He's giving you like the history of that country and the way that international travel works, and even the way that the human body works to let you go on. He's giving you the underlying mechanisms. So I think I don't think he's described everything, and I don't think he's described everything in its full accuracy all the time. But I think it may be that there's maybe more total comprehensive knowledge of the totality of reality in that package than I can find in any other single source. So So would you say that? So it's, I think you're to sort of come back to the sort of questions. You think he's had some kind of biological shift, which is sort of whatever's happened, something's happened to his physiology, or something's happened to his psychology, depending on where you want to place things. But something's happened to him, and then he's been able to access these states. And so you could say this is, if you went down the kind of the
endogenous DMT route, he suddenly started overproducing this, and so he was able to access these states. Or he just had a similar to sort of like Freud. Sorry, not Freud. Carl Jung just got to a point in his life where they just had this. I think Jung referred to it like a spiritual crisis, where it happened to him, and it couldn't be put back in the box, and it was just once revealed, it cannot be unrevealed. Something like that is what you would suggest is happening to him.
Yes, I think so. And he certainly felt like he had a particular mission. Like, he felt like, I am meant to disclose the nature of all this stuff. Like, I'm on a mission. And he would go and talk to beings in the afterlife and learn things from them. So he was very much like, there's people living there that have intent, and he was trying to accomplish something, but nothing happens except through means. So something would have had to happen in his body in order for that connection to happen. So he was, and actually he continues to talk at length about the minutia of how the spiritual world and your body interacts, because he knew all this anatomy, and if you want like some of the more bizarre stuff he talks about, he would go and talk to spirits, which to him, spirits are people who had died, right? You have a physical and a spiritual side of your body. Like I was saying before, once the physical body dies, then you're just spiritual. So you're aware of your spiritual surroundings. That's where you're operating. But every spirit that he interacted with had relation to somewhere in the human body, because he saw the human body as the microcosm of the totality of existence. So basically, like all the little cells in the body are performing some function for the greater whole, people, through what they love and the kind of person they become, resemble certain functions in the human body. And so when someone comes and talks to you that's a spirit, you can feel it in that part of your body. So he had this everything. It's not like you can make a clean break. The two worlds are so enmeshed. He described it more like the physical world is like the skin, and the spiritual world is the muscle and bones underneath it. They're absolutely interacting all the time.
Sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, you're back.
I muted myself earlier because I was coughing. Sorry.
Okay.
There's a couple of parallels there that stand out to me. One is in the world of Shipibo shamanism, which is one of the things I'm kind of interested in. I traveled to Peru to partake in some of these sort of traditional ceremonies, and they're very entrenched in the kind of the concept of spirits, and they kind of map it out to that basically every living thing has a spirit, and in particular plants. This is an Amazonian tradition,
right?
So each plant has a spirit, and then when you commune with these spirits by consuming some of these plants, then you are basically that is your sort of bridge to the spirit world. And it feels very much kind of like what Swedenborg described. You are dealing with autonomous entities which are communicating in a way which, I mean, having been there, and I think I'm a pretty imaginative guy, but I could not have come up with this stuff. I don't think and the other kind of strange thing with it, which I wanted to sort of ask you, is like, if you knew that if Swedenborg was already religious before these things. But I'll cut to my anecdote. Is that when I started really getting into these things, I was like yourself. I was also dealing with anxiety, and this was kind of my personal search for resolving these anxiety issues. I was not looking for any of this kind of spiritual stuff at all. In fact, I was so skeptical. I was a militant atheist. I had no time for all this kind of spiritual bullshit at all. And then it just landed on my face, and I was like, okay, right, so this is the thing. I need to shut up. And so I don't feel like I was preloaded for this at all. But do you know, was that the case with Swedenborg? Was he already religious, or is this what kind of? And just to be clear, I'm not saying I'm religious now, but I'm certainly a lot less of a militant dickhead than I was a few years ago. Yeah. So where did he kind of sit there?
Yeah. Well, he did come from a Christian culture and a Christian family. So his father was a bishop in
Mhm.
the Lutheran Church, which that was like the state religion of the time. So he was preloaded. I will say that the world and the ideas that he discovered went directly against a lot of the core
I
teachings
can imagine.
of what he had there. Yeah. It's funny because Swedenborg is like classified as a Christian mystic. You open it up, you see all those terms, but on almost every major point of the core beliefs of Christianity, he has a very opposed idea. And this is part of why he got in so much trouble, because he was saying, for example, well, he's saying like there's heaven and hell, right? Heaven and hell are these central doctrines in Christianity, and the as far as I understand, I'm not a religious scholar, but the picture of heaven and hell that the Lutheran Church had in Sweden in his day was that there's hell is this place of eternal torment that you're sent if you don't accept Jesus, usually through a verbal confession, and heaven is the reward for doing so. And actually, you don't go to there right after you die. You wait in the grave until Jesus Christ comes back, and then your body gets resurrected.
Mhm.
So that's the heaven and hell. But Swedenborg came back saying that yes, he saw magnificent, wonderful things that he called heaven, and terrifying and destructive things that he called hell. But he said that like those are primarily states of mind, like it's a state of mind that causes those things, and that hell is not a punishment. Hell is just the state of enjoying what is destructive to other people, and heaven is the state of enjoying what is constructive to other people. So a bunch of people that love harming other people create miserable conditions. A bunch of people that love helping other people create idyllic conditions. He was also very adamant that you didn't need to be in the Christian faith to go to heaven, that heaven is a matter of doing rightly by what you believe. And this was something that was Christians didn't like that at the time. There's a bunch of stuff that so he did maintain a lot of his idea of God changed, not unrecognizably, but there was this very strong belief in a trinity of gods in Swedenborg's day, where there's a Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and they're different persons. And the Father was angry at the human beings, so he sent Jesus, and the Son had to get sacrificed. But he was saying, no, it's just one God. It's just talking about it like you have a spirit, a body, and actions in your life. That's what the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit are in God. So it's not unrecognizably but Christian, but there's enough of a distinction there that he got in a lot of trouble for it.
Yeah, it seemed to me that it was causing him to reframe it. So I think he kept a lot of the sort of stuff that was the sort of because there are these sort of strong sort of links to faith, at least through the bits that I'm aware of.
Yes.
But yeah, he seems to reframe things in a way which I can certainly imagine was pretty heretical in the day of, sort of, he talks, if I'm correct, sort of visiting other planets and communing with other life forms and
yes,
stuff which really kind of shakes up a lot of the human-centric sort of biblical stuff. So yeah, I can imagine that went down like a lead balloon at the time.
yeah, definitely. He has a lot of descriptions of talking to extraterrestrial spirits. So not that he actually went to other planets physically, but that there's no time and space spiritually. So you could talk to people from all throughout the universe. Yep, that's a great way to not win you friends in the scientific community and the religious community. But in part, I think he had this message that he felt like he wanted to tell people about, as I was saying, about how to live the good life and what we're supposed to do. And really, it seems like some of the more out there spiritual experiences that he talked about, he was putting those out because people were requesting them. That's what people wanted to know about. And he was trying to use them to lead back. Actually, his book, Heaven and Hell, which was his best-selling book, that was only released after people were asking all about that, because he was trying to just talk about like philosophy and how you live and stuff. But people started to hear that he'd been having these out-of-body experiences. So he's like, okay, I'll tell you all about that so that you'll come in and learn this other stuff. But yeah, definitely a lot of things outside of the Christian mold, and things that now he'll use Christian language to describe things that seem to me much more universal. He'll even, like the term church, he'll talk about the church a lot. But when he's saying church, to him, he'll sometimes use it to describe organizations, but he'll say, like, historically there were these different churches in humanity, and that they're really these eras of spiritual understanding, because he'll say that there's a bunch of different religions could be part of the same church. It has to do with this fundamental way that people approach spirituality, but really the core concept that is church is this particular state within an individual of the joining of true concepts you have with good impulses. That's what the church is at its core. So it's like, it's stuff that you could put in some kind of new age book if you took out his Christian language around it, but yet it also interfaces with the Christian world that he was raised and immersed in.
So church, excuse me, church becomes like an abstract. Can you just unpack this church thing a bit for me? So church is
Sure.
If I have a certain belief or alignment or objective, is it somehow, and that if I'm other people who share this thing, that is a church with not necessarily a physical thing, although we could certainly build a physical thing. But am I on the right track there? Oh.
That's right. So I think before you were talking about, or we were talking about how both of our channels have the intent to improve life for people, and then we have our various means through which we do it.
Mm-hmm.
Our intent to improve people's lives would make us a church, regardless of the doctrine of that church is the forms in which we try to do it. And even if those are different, and he says that's the way that religion and spirituality is supposed to be, is that you have, it's what you love that matters. And if you're putting that first, particularly if you're putting love for the welfare of the human race first, you that makes it so you don't get as offended by differing ideas. That is actually a symptom of the loss of the core love of religion, that you have people wanting to kill each other over what they do or don't believe. It's because there's this missing element that is, so he talks about the church, the universal church around the world. People don't even know that they're in it together, but what it is it's everybody who is living rightly by what they think is true.
I think I quite like that that concept as the kind of, because church, I think the term church is a very powerful term, and I think it's because of its embodiment in these sort of physical locations, which certainly in my upbringing in the UK, it just lost all meaning. It was just this activity of going to church, and it just sucked. I couldn't relate to it. It had nothing to do with me. I don't think the guy who was preaching was just not on my wavelength. The people around me all looked like they were equally as bored as I was. But yeah, whenever you sort of hear of something that really encapsulates the sense of shared community, then the word church is often thrown up. So people talk about like a psychedelic church, or even I think Kanye West has has recently, not recently, but a while ago, started doing this kind of like Sunday service, this concept of a musical church, that just to get everyone in one place with the same idea. I think it was broadcast on online and stuff. So the church concept, I think is very powerful, and the word is very kind of loaded, and it kind of taps into something within us that was like, okay, this is bigger than me. There's something. It's being a part of things. It's very similar to community, but it's a bit further than community, because I think you really are sort of selling over to something bigger than yourself. Community is like people sort of working together, but then it's like, okay, we're working together in service of this thing that is kind of greater than any of us. And again, it could be anything, any kind of ideal or divine being, or whatever you want to put it there. But it's a very sort of powerful concept. So I do like that sort of reframing of church, because I think that's just like as I described it, I think the concept of church these days sucks, and it just turns a lot of people off, and something's being lost there, that we're throwing the baby out with the bathwater, maybe.
Well, that's great. I love your observation about the power of the word church, that it is when somebody's going to write an article about a group of people who get together and they call it the Church of something, even though it's not technically, it does add this power to it. Yeah. Oh, wow. We really are. It means we're vibing together on this thing. And the funny thing is the church, the literal church that you're describing before, doesn't sound at all like church, because it's like we're not together. Everyone's bored. We don't know what we're here. This is not relevant. There's no love for something that's brought us together. We're not here because this is moving us and because it's something that inspires us and we really love it. We're here for what Swedenborg would call external reasons. We're here because our parents are making us come here. We're here because the neighbors would be like, why didn't you go to church? If you don't go to church, we're here because you're supposed to do it, versus, it's a little corny, but like our heart brought us somewhere. And then when you're there with other people whose hearts brought them somewhere, yeah. Oh, yeah, this is kind of like a church, and it's exciting. It's like, oh yeah, we're like really together on this thing.
Yeah. And also, I mean, I think when you just talked about the Church of, it invokes something. I think this is something, I don't know what your feelings on these guys are, and I don't necessarily want to pull it out to you, but the classic example is the Church of Scientology. It's invoking that authority of that thing, whether for good or for evil. But the Church of Satan. It's straight away. It's kind of solidifying your ideal and your concept into something bigger than the sort of like the Facebook group of
exactly. Yeah, the only thing I know of Scientology is I watched that show with Leah Remini in it. Have you seen that?
I have. Yeah. I'm absolutely fascinated by Scientology, purely from the kind of the popcorn munching. I think those guys are completely nuts, but it's fascinating how passionate they've become in this very young religion with sort of with not really any sort of background to it, and the background that is there to it is because it has popped up in such recent times. It's very available as to, there's not very much mystery as to what this guy was up to, and it's kind of writing. There's some sort. It's very obviously strange, but then these people get very into it, and they've been able to sort of wield quite a lot of power with it, and almost to this destructive, which Leigh Remini started talks about a lot, or just how sort of bizarre some of these practices are. So. It's fascinating. I whenever there's a new Scientology documentary, I go straight down that rabbit hole.
Yeah, so I think it shows the power of church as a concept, like you were saying. And like I say, like I only know it through the documentary, but it seems like the people in that Church of Scientology are like really ruthless and brutal, and using that title and the trappings that go along with being a church to really control people. And that Swedenborg was saying that this is because there's an underlying reality that we do gather in these churches based on what you love, that is a real thing for human beings. So we're inherently vulnerable to being controlled by organizations that assume that mantle. And Swedenborg, I mean, he spends probably more energy on calling out the churches of his day than on anything else. That he was constantly pointing out how destructive it is, particularly when you organize a church around anything other than universal love or love for the good of the whole human race. That is what he says love of God is to love doing what is good and useful. As soon as you get into something else, you end up with the love of control usurping that, and then it's a tool that people can use to control each other and get what they want.
Yeah, I mean, there's kind of couple things you said there that I'd kind of like to. So I'm just going to make sure I've gone down here. So one I picked up from one of your videos is, or I thought it might have actually been one of your colleagues, but a description of God is love and wisdom. And I don't disagree with that in particular, but I did have a kind of an experience myself where it kind of, because I think that's quite a comforting thought, that sort of God and the sort of the feeling of God as a kind of like a benevolent, for want of a better word, super being, sort of overseeing this creation that is unfolding to some sort of grand design. And I had an experience of God as when I interchange sort of, you know, God, universal consciousness, the creative force, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
I don't particularly subscribe to the kind of the religious angle, but as just some. Oh, I say just some. I don't want to make it sound too thing, but basically, it would be like giving a newborn child omnipotent superpowers, just to sort of, that every thought that is manifested is just happening. So it's like whatever emotional state or dream, or like, you know, you can just imagine some baby just waving its arm through the air with pure wonder, and just the universes are popping into existence on the whim of some thing which has no idea what it is, or even how to possibly, like, have no idea that the scale of what it is doing, that it is just by the blink of an eye, our entire existence has come into being. And it's just, it seemed to me within this particular experience of something that is not in control of itself, and that is all just unfolding as a kind of like a, hopefully, or sometimes not, happy accident. And so when I heard that quote of like, God is love and wisdom, and again, I've certainly had experiences where God has been love and wisdom. So I have many of these experiences, but I just it kind of gave me pause for thought there of, is this, it seemed a little too assured. And I think maybe there is this something that's kind of like baked into the doctrine, or is it, you know, is this just like a possible thing? Because I think certainly my take after experiencing these different things, and I think this is one of the things when you do put yourself through one of these experiences, you cannot unexperience it. And so each one is kind of becomes as almost as valid as the others. And so you end up at a point where you've got to say, I don't know. I honestly don't know what's going on. I think it's amazing. I think what's going on is beyond my comprehension. It's very humbling, because you're like, okay, I know nothing here. But it's kind of, So I just wondered like what's convinced yourself or Swedenborg that sort of it is love and wisdom rather than just chaotic explosions of experience.
Yeah. Well, I love the idea of that baby making things happen, like you're talking about that. So let's see. So Swedenborg uses these terms, love and wisdom, just more than you could possibly imagine. He just uses them all over the place, love and wisdom. But what he means by them is fairly complicated, and I struggle to understand the whole thing. So love and wisdom are the two substances that make up everything. He says that, or not two substances, but the two elements that make up everything. So love is the underlying reality of everything, and wisdom is the form that reality takes.
Okay.
So, and I was just trying to nail down, because it could be that like there's an underlying reality, which is mouse, and then this is the form that this one takes. So that is what God is, substance and form. But also, in Swedenborg says there's an image of love and wisdom in everything that exists anywhere. So there's an image of substance and form, and that everything, that they're supposed to be united to each other. And when they're not united, that's what causes problems. So what we were just talking about with the religion thing, they're supposed to be love and wisdom together. So you're supposed to be the desire to do what's good married to the ideas that you have. But when you subtract the love and you just end up with what Swedenborg calls faith alone, which is wisdom without love, then there's a problem. So that's all through everything. As far as God being love and wisdom, well, he says that all of Yes, Swedenborg definitely describes an organized God. He has a whole book that's called Divine Providence, which is like, this is the system by which life unfolds. And the system has an intent to it. And the intent is to, through all of the events that happen in everyone's life, lead them to a lasting happy state of mind. But he definitely talks about innocence and wisdom going hand in hand. That the greatest, it's just funny when you're saying, I don't know anything. He says that it is wisdom to admit that what we know is nothing compared to what we don't know. And that also that happy state of mind, the state of heaven, is impossible without what he calls innocence. So I'm just, when you were talking about the baby, God as the baby, that made me think of it. That is the core of what God is. He has he always has his own definition for words. Like he'll use a word that we usually use, innocence, and it usually means close to what we normally mean by it, but it's got these extra layers on it. Well, he'll talk about innocence, and he'll say that, yeah, innocence is like little kids. When you see them, they have this air of innocence, but that's not actual innocence. It's only external innocence because they don't know any better. That there is an innocence of wisdom, which that is a willingness to be led by what is good and true. And you can get into that only once you have had the chance to not be in that state and you come in and choose it for yourself. So I don't think I have a really clear answer to your question there, but I do. Swedenborg does describe a God who knows what's going on, but yet is has this like playful innocence inside of it. Yeah, so that's what I'll say.
Yeah, I think that's that's a part of. I think this is where I kind of drift out a bit with kind of most sort of religion, is that it does always seem very human centric, in that we're always kind of imagining this higher power as something like us. And I did notice this kind of coming through in a lot of Swedenborg's sort of descriptions of, you know, even when he talks about sort of traveling to other planets and communing with other races, it was it was almost like, you know, here's some humans here's some life forms on another planet. They're kind of like us. We're going to have a chat about it. And, you know, angels and sort of demons, but very kind of like human centric. And I think this is one of the kind of the things where I think, psychedelic experiences are very eye-opening, because they are so bizarre, and I kind of bizarre almost has like a negative connotation, but they're amazingly bizarre in the most fantastic ways. Well, hopefully, anyway. You can also have extremely disturbing ones, but they are the idea of kind of humanness can almost become absurd in these points. This is why very often you see people just in hysterics just on psychedelics. I mean, I've got plenty of videos on my own channel, just me absolutely creasing my side laughing, because the notion then of when you come back into this human body, it's like, this is ridiculous. I've just explored 14 different dimensions of being, and now I'm back into this monkey suit. It's just so funny. And you know, the kind of the cosmic joke is how it's often referred to. And I just wanted to tie that back to what we're talking about with sort of religion and sort of like the organized religion, because I did notice there was a lot of stuff that came across in Swedenborg, or at least your retelling of it, where it did seem very structured. I think there was, you know, a video I watched of yours recently of like sort of in the room with you now there is 2 angels and 2 demons,
right?
Like this, and there is a sort of a input coming from each, and somewhere in the middle is you're getting feedback from this. And I was kind of reminded not to you know, try and make fun of or anything, but just to draw sort of parallels. Is that I know whenever sort of religions get very specific about these kind of numbers, you know, like 72 virgins in heaven sort of thing.
Yeah, right.
It's like, why? why the numbers? So I guess that's quite like is it at that point? It seems like there is a system here people, something that you could get dogmatic about. Like, you know, there could be some challenger to your position, like say, oh well, you know, no, actually I had, you know, I did this and that. Actually, there was three, and then you have the divide of the stuff. So yeah, what are your thoughts, sir, around this, that specificity, and like why were the kind of numbers important and stuff?
Yeah. So I think that the best way that I can avoid getting the division you're talking about is if somebody says there's three, I'll be like, oh, okay, thank you for sharing that. You know, like, okay, cool. And that's actually like, that's no joke. To try to do that is the hardest thing about spirituality, because otherwise it's just, what am I in love with here? Am I in love with the thinking that I can do some good for the human race, or is it just my ego? It's like, oh, I can be a spiritual teacher. And the cool thing about being a spiritual teacher is that people will say I'm right about everything, and I get to say, but as soon as somebody says something different, then that defeats my purpose, and then I get mad. So that's you know, my job and the job of like all of us. Religious ideas or not, it's great to find out how to hold them a bit loosely. But I'll give you some, like, the specificity of what Swedenborg is describing there. Why is it why two angels? Why two evil spirits? And I don't know, I wouldn't even say, according to Swedenborg, that I could know. There's so many different situations he describes and things, but the reason why he gets that specific there is that, you remember I was talking about love and wisdom before, there being an element of love and wisdom and everything. He says that in human beings, we have two primary vessels or organs, spiritually speaking, that receive the two elements. So you have your will, which is, or your volition, it's sometimes translated. We would probably call it your feelings / motivations, the emotive side of you. So your will is the organ that receives the love, and then your intellect or your understanding is the organ that receives the ideas. So Swedenborg is saying, well, you have to have equilibrium in order to be in order to have the kind of consciousness where I can just go do whatever I want. And so you have to have balancing forces from negative and positive on both your mind and your heart. So you have one of those with each of you. And as the spiritual world as a whole works, it's not just like it's much like the internet, or everything is really connected. So any one individual that you're interacting with has a bunch of connections to other individuals, and I'm, you know, who knows, it may have even changed in the time since he was writing. But yes, I think that, and I'm sure that what he's describing is like a little slice. I mean, even if I said, if you go to Philadelphia, this is what you're going to see. Okay, it might be there, but there's a lot of other stuff in Philadelphia, and so I think it's really about making sure I got my priorities straight, and what's my, so the way that I check that is, how in love am I with my own intelligence, which means how much am I just here to feel good about seeming like I'm the smartest guy in the room, and am I triggered when people don't acknowledge me? It's like, look at me, I'm this guy on YouTube, and look at this, I got all these views, and so that's one thing that I got to do, and then try to, you can't really know, like, do I have a good motivation doing this? Do I have a good motivation doing that? But what you can do is, when obviously destructive impulses come to you, to try to not act those out, or not treasure those, or not so doing that is the best way you can try to ensure that you're coming at things from good motives. So I think there is a lot of specificity in Swedenborg. There's got to be some objective truth about how things, even if it's a much more complicated spiritually. I mean, there's definitely, like, on the physical level, like, I've got a pen here, there's one microphone, there is an arrangement of things. There's some kind of arrangement of whatever else is going on. But yeah, I bet that it's going to be so complicated that even what Swedenborg is describing is just a very crude description of it. And he even says that he had this experience where he was talking to a couple of angels about his books, and they were saying, basically saying this stuff is not that great. Like it's so crude. Like it barely describes anything. And he's saying, he wrote this in his journal, and he's saying, well, yeah, but this is the best that can be done, and this is the way people. This is the only way people are going to understand this. So I think that, yeah, it's about, imagine if you try to, I think about biology, because I was studying biology in college because I wanted to do like conservation biology. I've always loved nature, ecosystems and stuff like that. But if you get into like the way that the human body works, you have to know exactly what you're talking about to perform surgery or something, or design a new medicine. You have to know so specifically. So I'm not under any belief that my knowledge of the way that state of the spiritual world is around you is precise enough for something like that. It's just going to be a real approximation, because actual things are so complicated that you can study them. You can study them for your whole life and only know little bits of them, right?
Yeah, and this is where I think this, the kind of the specificities is something I kind of like. I was a bit worried, because when I've had these experiences myself, it is beyond the comprehension of me in my 3D kind of state of being now. I mean, that's if I could, I wouldn't have any need to go and do the crazy sort of Amazonian sort of jungle medicines. It is, and I think to think of it in terms of like it being organized in a way that is comprehensible to the sort of the human being. I don't think it is. I mean, it is, when you were there, as we kind of described it again, it feels incredibly structured, but it's structured in a sort of, it's almost kind of, it's like this sort of, if you've seen the movie Interstellar, where at the end he's in the sort of, he's in the Tesseract thing, and even that's some crazy sort of 4D object, but it makes sense to him at the moment, and he's seeing some representation of it as much as he can understand. I mean, even that's not even anywhere close. And when you sort of come back from it, you have to kind of just, this is where the narrative part comes in, and the meaning. You have to sort of compile it down into something that you can use, because and it's even the ability to process it in the form you received it is now slipping away from you as you come out of the experience. So it's
Swedenborg would describe, he described a couple of times going and seeing something when he was in the spirit, and then coming back and trying to write about it, and being upset that he, even though it was so obviously understandable to him there, that he couldn't understand it and couldn't write it down. And that there's and he will provide a lot of, he says that you can approximate a lot of this stuff in ways that we can understand, but often when he's writing, he'll say, and this can't be understood by any earthly idea. This can't be understood. So he does get pretty specific, and I'm not trying to say, oh, that you have to like think that's great, but I will say there's plenty of times in there when he's like, this is I'm not even going to try to explain this. I'm not even going to try to explain this. So
yeah, I mean, I can definitely relate, and I think the only way that it can be communicated is in, like I said, in meaning, in narration. This is what it meant to me. This is not some fundamental axiom, because even to me this was absolutely bonkers, but here's how I interpreted that. And I think this is where a lot comes from the kind of the spiritual sort of experiences, with even related to your own sort of relationship with Swedenborg's works. It's what does this mean rather than just dogmatically he said this, therefore it's this. It's how can I integrate this? What does it sort of mean to me? But I just want to circle back to the two angels and two demons thing, because I think this is something else which I'd like to unpack a little bit with you, in regards to the inputs of these things, spirits, whatever you want to call them, and also the concept which I've heard mentioned in quite a few of your videos. I watched a few of your talks, and it seemed like a very fundamental principle there was the concept of free will. And I was kind of, it seemed to me when I saw the angels and demons thing that there was a bit of a clash here, because on the one hand you're being fed inputs from some external source, but then we're talking about sort of free will. And just to clarify, I am absolutely not sure where I sit at all on the free will debate.
Sure.
I have moments where I absolutely feel like I have total agency of myself and I'm completely free will. And then I have moments where I feel just like a pane of glass just moving through experience and stuff is just happening to me. And even, if I stop and think about it, I'm not particularly authoring these words that are coming out of my mouth. They just are doing. So given the kind of, the inputs of the spiritual, what sort of, how do you then solidify this into this strong belief in free will?
That the experience you're talking about there, where you're speaking and you just take a second to reflect, where is this conveyor belt coming from that's giving me my next, how am I stringing sentences together? How am I getting a subject and a predicate here? I get that a lot because I'd have to give speeches and things. And sometimes you're just pretty much on autopilot, but yet you're making plenty of sense.
Yeah, but it also allows for you to then surprise yourself, because then sometimes you go on autopilot and you're like, wow, I am on form. Like this is actually really good. I should have recorded this. This was a good one. And so there is something there where it's this idea that I'm authoring things. I think logically it falls down, even though experientially it feels like I'm doing it. But if I stop and think about it for a minute, I can't claim it at all. But sorry, I interrupted.
Yeah. No, that's great. And I'm trying not to just say, oh, everything you say is just like Swedenborg. But the funny thing about Swedenborg's free will is that it's not necessarily free will like you'll often hear that term described, because he's very big on that we don't originate things, that there's communal pathways through which consciousness comes. There's an emanation of consciousness from the divine, which then passes through all these different spirits and angels and everything we're talking about, and we're one link in that chain. So just like we were talking about, the stuff that's coming through you, the window pane is pretty good. But the free will that he talks about is essentially, I think, and this is like, it's a bit paradoxical, and it's something that I'm trying to wrap my head around, but it's really more about our choice in which influences we take to ourselves and express. So, and it's not maybe like in every instant moment, it's more about over time, what are you building into yourself? So the freedom, he talks about freedom always in relation to enjoyment of something. He talks about when he says there's a freedom to do what is good, that means there is an enjoyment in doing what is good, and a freedom to do what is harmful. It's fun to make fun of people or steal things from people. And so there's these freedoms to do each, means there are pleasures in doing each. And I think, and we are from the spiritual world being given this buffet of options, throughout the day. I can laugh at this person. I can help this person. I can, ruminate on these harmful thoughts. I cannot. And it's like the not attrition, but accumulation of your choices, that if I'm continually choosing to enjoy insulting people and cutting them down, I'm using my freedom to more and more make that who I am, right?
So say, if I could just pin you down this, when you say choosing that, because I don't, I think we could all relate to that sort of gleeful destruction, or that gleeful sort of malice. We've all experienced it at school, where you just an absolute arsehole to some poor kid for some reason, and then you kind of hopefully regret it in later life, and you do enjoy it. There's something yeah, sort of it's some kind of perverse enjoyment in that. But if you could choose, then I don't think anybody I would say I choose to do that. I think we would all choose to be better people if we could. I think you'd have to be a very strange. So when you say choose, can we like? Is that the point of authorship? Do you think that there is somebody there somewhere who's like, today I'm just going to be an arsehole, like I am just going to feed that part of me which is just darkest and just revel in it?
I think that it has to do with what justification or lack thereof we put on that stuff. So when you're I can think back to being in middle school, like, which is like 7th and 8th grade, and just being total jerk to other kids. And I don't think at the time, I don't think I really had much of a choice. I mean, at that age, I distinctly remember when I first started to really understand that other people are other people. And it was whatever, probably
way too late,
20 or something like that. Yeah, he just didn't. And I remember being a kid, and we would like go run around and trespass or jump in people's pools or something like that, and you just have zero sense of the sense of psychological insecurity you're giving them. That like, if now that I'm like a homeowner, if somebody had been messing with my property, oh man, that would. But you don't have any sense of that. You're just like, oh, it's dangerous, and let's try not to get caught. You're not even. It's not even really malice. It's just like, okay, this is fun.
I suppose it's that innocence thing, maybe, like you talk around the beginning, but it's like it's the perverse opposite of that innocence. It's that kind of, I think if you stop and realize that possibly the harm that you were coming, then maybe you wouldn't have done it, but you just don't have that kind of wetware at the time.
That's right.
You just it's a pool. I'm going to jump in it. Like, why not?
Yeah, right. You're not reflexive. I think that it comes down to our willingness to examine ourselves and go through the process of what Swedenborg calls self-examination. So I'm going to stop for a minute and think about the kinds of things that I do, and really look at, are some of these things harmful, and like, and take in whatever way you can, make the effort to pursue that. Because he says that if you don't examine yourself, you naturally, because of the joy negative things give you, well, that person deserved it, I'm teaching them a lesson, something, which sometimes you may be. This is why, as you were saying before, I can't go over and tell you how to be, because I don't know what's going on in your motivation stuff. But for yourself, you can try. So you'd look and you'd say, hey, this particular thing that I do, that I think if I really consult you have like your two parts, your will and your intellect. And he says on the will side, you can't tell the difference. You just like, something feels good, but on the intellect, you can start to, based on what you've learned and what you know, you can start to form an idea that I suspect that this is maybe not right for me to be doing that. And in a period of reflection, setting an intention then that when that comes up again, I'm not going to participate in it. I think that would be more of that. That's what the choosing is. And the reverse of that wouldn't be really like, I'm going to go be evil, I love being evil. It would be more like you're doing something that where you're, exploiting a bunch of people or doing some great human rights abuse, and you sort of compartmentalize that and come up with a story that says, oh, this is why I'm okay, this is why it's fine. When if you do have the overall capacity to investigate that, should you want to, and perhaps notice that these people don't want to be exploited like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I know what you mean, Matt. And I think that's a great explanation. But I think this is probably a good place to tie it up, because we've been talking for 90 minutes now, and I could actually, I could probably go another 90 minutes, Curtis, but I do feel my underlying sickness getting the better of me, to be honest, and I feel the need to go and cower under a blanket with a hot drink and some painkillers. Yeah. So I just want to say, excuse me, Curtis, I've really enjoyed this conversation, and I've and you sort of your willingness to sort of to talk about these topics. I think it's kind of unusual for people to think about someone, you know, from a sort of a religious angle and the sort of the, you know, the psychedelic subculture angle to sort of come together and be able to have a conversation like this. So I'm really grateful you could do it with such a friendly and approachable way, mate.
Yeah, well, I really enjoyed it, and thank you for braving your illness to get this to happen.
I hope it wasn't too off-putting.
It wasn't. It was a really enjoyable conversation, and I just feel like you're thoughtful and smart, and I've enjoyed this hour.
That's great. Is there any sort of where you want to point people to if they wanted to learn more about yourself or your organization or Swedenborg?
Yeah, YouTube.com/off the left eye. We have a channel called Off the Left Eye where, we got 1,000 videos of all kinds of the ins and outs of the philosophy that I've been talking from here or there. If you want to download any of Swedenborg's books for free, go to swedenborg.com.
Okay, and I'll put some links in the description below so people can be able to find the stuff out very easily. But yeah, again, Curtis, thanks a lot, mate. I've really enjoyed this conversation. I hope perhaps we get a chance to do it again when I am slightly healthier than I am right now. And just thanks a lot, mate. It's been great.
Thank you.